Created by Monad Studios East on the 13th of October 2019, Deepwoken is a difficult game with permanent character loss. Losing characters is a part of the game that should be expected. I started this game in 2022, which is not too far, but it's quite far into the progression. The way the game works is there was verse 1 and verse 2. I'm not going to explain that too much because it's not really that relevant to the video, but once I started this game, the first thing that blew me away was the lore. I mean, Monad Studios East have truly created one of, I think, the best lore systems for any Roblox game. But I remember spawning in and I had a race, and that was a Capra, and the time I brought another slot, it was a Chrysid. And that leads me with today's video idea. Let's talk about the anatomy and physiognomy of both the Capra and the Chrysid and how their abilities would really work in a real life scenario. Now, I'm assuming most people watching this video are familiar with Deepwoken, but if you aren't, here is an image of a Chrysid, or a Chrysid. I'm not actually sure how to say it. So, what makes them distinct is their antennas, the fluff on their neck, and they have unique eyes. I'll pull up a cell tour to the right, which is basically just another race. You can see the difference in the facial features. Now, every aspect in Deepwoken is based off of an animal, and Chrysids are based off moths, which look like this. Pretty scary, right? So, this begs the question, what does a Chrysid contribute that a moth also does? Now, in Deepwoken, you have talents. This is an innate talent of a Chrysid. Mothwing Dust. You release Mothwing Dust when others are the first to strike, granting you vision of your attacker. Your antenna improve your peripheral sense, narrowing the angle at which you can be backstabbed. Okay, well, it's great to know that, right? But how do they do it? Because from the looks of it, they just look human, right? Now, I did have one idea. They produce this irritant, right? Like actual moths do in order to deter predators. Which begs the question, how do they release it? So, we're gonna think of the anatomy and ways that they could actually release it. And my first idea was that they had pores on their skin. These would, under stress, dilate enough for the dust to come out. However, that's not how it works in moths. So, how it actually works is that moths can collect dust, and those scales stay on their body. So, it's the way that humans, shed skin cells. What the fuck? Skin cells. However, the moth can't get rid of these. So what happens when it's startled, or when something rubs against it and gives it enough friction, the dust separates, which would be, for example, if the moth was attacked. Now, why does it do this? Simply, the moth doesn't want to die, so it tries to release a chemical irritant to irritate the predator long enough for it to get away. Now, Chrysids don't have wings, so how do they accumulate all of this? First of all, the neck fluff that they have would serve as quite a lot of surface area for dust to accumulate without being able to escape. And that's practically it. You know, maybe I'll revisit this, but I can't really think of much for Chrysids apart from the fact that they probably have a larger shedding factor that allows them to accumulate this dust. Capras, however, this is gonna be interesting. So grab some popcorn, sit down and prepare yourselves. Now, I'm going to explain what a Capra is the same way I explained a Chrysid. Here is an image of a Capra. They're an aspect related to goats and have various goat-like characteristics, including their horns and the masks, which are shaped like a goat skull. So, what is a Capra's ability? All Capras have the ability to mark a player when at a campfire, with the sole exception of the Juric, which does not need a campfire. When at a campfire, the following buff will be given to everyone, healing 15% of the marked player's total HP. In addition, no matter what the buff is, it will last for 60 seconds. And for the Juric and the Q, it will increase the buffs that they gain from food. I'm going to start with how it heals 15% of the affected player's total HP. Again, ignoring the Juric, which I will explain later, the idea I have for how it gives this marking is through thermal energy reliant evaporation. The theory is that Capras can excrete chemicals through forcing themselves to sweat, which is a type of eccrine sweat excretion. Epidermal glands on the shoulders and necks are able to secrete a highly concentrated liquid with chemicals in. I will explain these chemicals later. This, provided with the fact that they're at campfires which provide the internal thermal energy, it allows it to surpass the latent heat of vaporization. And due to the increased body heat from ATP muscle contractions during combat, it turns the fluid into a vapor which diffuses into the air. The chemicals are likely stored in this fluid, so when the chemical breaks down, which I will assume for now is water, everything else that's inside of it is diffused as a gas to everyone surrounding the campfire. So, in order to heal this 15% of HP, my idea was that there would be an increase in clotting factor in order to close up the wounds in the skin. Now, in order for something to clot, it needs fibrin, red blood cells, and platelets. We have plenty of platelets, so much in fact that they can become an issue over time. So, what does the mark do? I believe that the mark stimulates the erythropoietin, I've butchered that, hormone, which increases the production of red blood cells and is produced in the kidney as a response to low oxygen levels that could be caused by bleeding. Now, it could also have granulite macrophage colony stimulating proteins, which would help with the production of white blood cells. Platelet-rich derivatives in the blood should already be there. Now, in order to increase the skin healing after these clots have formed, there are epidermal growth factors, which accelerate the growth of skin over the new glands by rebuilding the tissue matrix. Furthermore, diindolylmethane, found in cruciferous vegetables, increases the animal healing factor by 2 times in animal testing. This hasn't been tested on humans yet, so I can't really generalize that. In addition, quercetin plant flavonoid has the fastest wound closure rates as it forces collagen deposition in the skin. Furthermore, aragonase 1 catalyst enzyme forces non-healing wounds to begin the process. So, what does this mean? I believe that in order to do this, certain chemicals are excreted, and these are the chemicals. Moving on to the mark of Jurek, which I will explain the distribution for now. The way I believe this works, because it can't be used around a campfire, is that these animals have established suborbital, hornous, and interdigital scent glands, which could have specialized diffusion pathways to allow the chemicals released to move out. And this would not need any thermal energy and would diffuse into the bloodstreams of the others through their respiratory systems. So, what could they release? The Jurek help with the stabilization of sanity, which I'm just going to link to poor mental health, which in a real world would mean they probably end up exhibiting some sort of benzodiazepine, which is a type of antipsychotic. This helps reduce psychotic symptoms of conditions such as schizophrenia, which I suppose you could argue that insanity is kind of like schizophrenia. It's hallucinations, delusions, and the attempt to self-harm. They may also have dopamine antagonistics, such as haloperidol, which they target the hallucinations, specifically the occipital lobe and the thalamus, which causes relaxation in the superior temporal gyrus and the cerebellum, and this would reduce the symptoms of insanity. Now finally, moving on to the mark of Nemet. This is really simple actually, it just makes food more nutritious. So there's no way to actually make a food item more nutritious. However, you can make digestion of that food easier to get more nutrients out of it. Now, vitamin C would be the first thing. It's a reducing agent in the gut, and it alters ions to be soluble in water, which allows them to diffuse into the cells. In addition, vitamin D, or cholecalciferol, I've butchered that again, I'm sorry. It produces signals which helps create transport proteins through protein synthesis, or transcription, as you could call it, to pull calcium and phosphates into the epithelial cells of the intestines. In addition, it may help stimulate amino acids, which would aid in the co-transport of zinc and selenium into the epithelial cells of the intestines. This would be to allow easier digestion, however it wouldn't actually make the food more nutritious. Again, you'd just be getting more nutrients out of it that otherwise would be passed through the digestive system and excreted. Now, that's going to be all for today. I'm not a very good drawer and my hands always shake, so it's not like I'd really be able to draw any diagrams of this. I can try though. I also don't want to go into thermodynamics too much because that still confuses me. It's something that I've got to study up on more. But that's my idea for how the Capra and the Chrysid works. If you want to, you can comment any race that you want to see me try and explain the ability of. And I'll get to it. Eventually I want to go through all of the races, that's my plan. Apart from Celtors, because I mean, they're just charismatic. If it's something that makes sense already and doesn't have a biological explanation, I won't be able to do it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. It's been a while since I made my last ones, and this is the content I'm thinking of making now, so hope you enjoy.